First off, I want to start by celebrating you and seeing you, because Land of the Sky, while it's 10 years old, was born in a world in which we knew the Christian story was not being told in a way that we felt was bigger than Jesus. We were convicted that the Christian tradition had abandoned Jesus in a lot of ways and failed to do the difficult work of creating a more just and generous world in which all of God's beloved creation was embraced. That is an evolution, and it's a continued evolution in the Christian tradition today. In the last year, I know that you all have done big movements, and that is hard work, and it's painful work. And I celebrate that work that you have done. I celebrate the conversations by which you are coming together to talk about how justice can be more important in the work you can do. And I also can't help but name that there are so many relationships in this room that matter to me in my history, including when I was just a very young person, a little over 10 years ago. David Blackman hired me at the hospital for my first job as a chaplain. And I worked at the hospital for some time, and during that time was when Land of the Sky was born. Land of the Sky was born in 2009, as it is our 10th birthday, and our commitment is to live justly, to love abundantly, and to walk humbly in the ways of Jesus. Catching the
is it a hearing?
We hear feedback. I moved because I was hearing it. I'm sorry, because that's irritating to all of you listening, I'm sure. I want to name, so 2009 was when we were born, some formative moments in the life of our church and the lens by which we saw things. 2009, we were created. We believed that we would operate in a way that saw justice by looking at a variety of different focuses, foci, right? We would look at economic justice. We would look at racial justice and immigration justice. We would look at gender and sexuality justice. We would look at disability justice. And we set these up in creation here. We set these up as mechanisms to guide our year. So in every 2 months, we would spend time focusing on these different areas that were vital to who we wanted to be and how we wanted to see the world and the questions we wanted to ask. In 2014, Michael Brown was shot. He was the gentleman who was shot in Ferguson. And it was a transformative moment in the life of our church because it shifted much of the work we do to seeing the world through the important lens of racial justice. We continue that work today. It is painful and it is hard. And one of the truths about much of how we operate in the church, particularly in the white church, is that we don't want to see much of what's before us. It's uncomfortable, it is hard to see, and one of the places of privilege we sit is that we can choose not to see. So, I suspect that in the next 15 or 20 minutes, folks might get uncomfortable, and I apologize if that happens, but actually that's sort of the gospel, discomfort. One time I was at a church conference and somebody raised their hand and said, "How do you get your folks to change?" And I thought, holy smokes, did that clergy person just ask about change? I was like, it's the entirety of the gospel. It is what Jesus asked of us, was transformation, the continued evolution and changing of our lives in service to the possibilities of God's divine hope and love. That is what Jesus embodied, and that's how he lived. What ends up happening in the Christian church and why we don't see is because we often make a distinction between charity and justice. And much of what the church has done is spent its time doing really important charity work. And I don't disregard that work because charity is an important part of the long-term strategy by which justice takes place. But charity doesn't solve justice. It doesn't solve the problems, right? And so it's a two-pronged approach by which all of our communities have to be engaged. Charity is when we write a check and when we show up to maybe serve food at the soup kitchen. Charity is when we go buy socks for the people who don't have socks on the street. Charity is when we buy gifts for foster kids at Christmas. Those are all really great things, and they don't change the systemic problems behind it. So much of what has evolved in the Christian tradition, in certainly our culture, has been work that's charity at the neglecting of justice. And these days and this time are asking us to see all the ways in which our participation in charity keeps us from justice. So I imagine that there are people who do a lot of good things in here, and part of the story of being told in racial justice right now, and part of what we're trying to get at and break down, is a binary by which people understand their lives as good or bad. And so I do these things, so I am good. I did this thing, so I am bad. That binary keeps us from actually doing a lot of reflective work. We find ways to do good stuff, to convince ourselves we're good, and then we don't acknowledge the ways in which the systems around us aren't good, or we're participating in them. This comes up a lot in Grace. I don't know if anyone has read the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. It's excellent, but the sort of primary argument about why white people tend to not be able to get uncomfortable is because we look at our lives as good or bad. We see other people as good or bad. That binary defines things. It's part of why we can't hear other people's stories or the multiplicity of story behind them. When you do that, if I say something or do something that might not be perfect, then I become a bad person. But the world is a lot more nuanced and complex than that. And part of the Christian story has also been about creating certainty and removing the nuance of the world, right? Like, there's no chaos here. We know exactly what's expected of us. If we just do this, this will be okay. That has sort of been taught to us as how we live our faith. And what it keeps us from doing is actually seeing the ways in which we are complicit in so much just by virtue of our positions. I am a child of a single mother. My parents were divorced when I was young. My father was gay. He died of AIDS. Those are all really important parts of my story. I went to the University of Virginia. I, after graduating there, went to be a political scientist, desired to be a professor in political science. Did not finish my PhD, discerned my call to ministry, went to Chicago Theological Seminary. I moved here with my husband, who has a job at UNCA. I have 2 children. I've got a really good job that I love. I drive a hybrid. I'm white. I'm heterosexual. I'm cisgender. I'm all these things. I have tons and tons of privilege. And part of my story is some disadvantage and some complication and some challenge. It's not either or. Oftentimes, when people get to conversations about privilege, they want to explain all the ways that they aren't privileged. But I'm going to suggest that all of us in this room operate from a degree of privilege. There doesn't mean there's not complexity in your story, and that complexity isn't important. But part of our ability to see others is to stop centering ourselves. And when we spend time thinking about all the ways our story meets other people's oppressions, we start to center ourselves to that story. So, a couple things Tommy wanted to address was that idea. How do we get at the tendency to stop seeing ourselves so much and start seeing the people around us? So I'd ask you, what keeps you from seeing other people?
Busy lives.
Busy lives. Which, right, the racial justice piece is really interesting here, but I'm a super busy person and I have a super busy life, and white supremacy is all about busy lives. Like, we keep things so busy we can barely reflect on how unjust everything is.
I think while we're all here, like let's just take the city of Asheville, we still are in our individual little circles.
Yeah.
Whether it's our family, whether it's our work life, or our church congregation. And we don't really interact with those other circles. We see them and pass them, but it doesn't go more beyond it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that location is a big thing.
Yeah.
It's just hard.
I think location is a really important one, because as far as privilege goes, you will never get outside of that challenge unless you work to relocate yourself, right? So it is an instrumental part to how we have to go into the world to then see. One of my favorite ministries in town is 12 Baskets. Has anyone been to 12 Baskets? Excellent. Field trip. 12 Baskets is over in West Asheville, and 12 Baskets is also part of something called Asheville Poverty Initiative. One of the things that Asheville Poverty Initiative does is it takes people around town on poverty tours to help people see poverty, which I highly recommend. 12 Baskets is a free meal that's done from reclaimed food. It's every day, Monday through Friday in West Asheville. And you go in and you sit down and you eat. And it's a field trip because you will go there for lunch. You will not go there to serve. And the place will work to change you because you will sit among people you would not normally sit among. And you will be uncomfortable. And you will have to live in that discomfort. And you might ask questions and hear stories and learn about the person sitting next to you who there are so many assumptions about. The last time I was there, I sat down and I was with two folks who were seated and a little boy, and I assumed they were all together, although the little boy was across the table, and the two people were like, we have no idea whose kid that is. And then Mama flies in, and she sits down, and we're all eating, and she tells me, they live in Brevard now, and they're up here cleaning out a storage unit because they left that up here in Asheville, but of course they didn't have the resources to live here in Asheville. And so they're just up here visiting. They came to 12 Baskets to get a meal. She is a part of our community. Our world is set up in a way that there are people who do not have enough. We do a really good job of isolating ourselves from them. Our world sets it up in that way too. Zoning helps with that. Just our general locations, right? The churches we choose, the places we frequent, all of those things will shape that. One of the things that's taking place right now at Land of the Sky is we are in the process of, so Land of the Sky at its 7th year moved back to the original building that it was in. It is in a building that was once Westminster Presbyterian Church in East Asheville, behind the Subaru dealer. A couple years back, this is another instrumental moment in our life as a church, Matthew Desmond came to speak at UNCA. Did anyone go to hear him? Great. Here's another book, Evicted. Evicted is a book by a sociologist who writes about the very real way our housing system is set up to actually disenfranchise and disempower humans over and over and over. Some of us might be property owners. We might actually be the landlords to renters. It's a remarkable insight to the world. One of the things we're missing is deeply affordable housing in Asheville. And following that, Beloved of Asheville, if you don't know Beloved, Beloved is over on Grove Street and has a place over here downtown, their Liberation Station, and they do fabulous work. If you see people walking around downtown with street medics shirts on, they have a whole group of people who are trained to help others on the street, who are on the street. Those folks who help are people who usually live on the street. Beloved had a vision, and that vision was that there needed to be deeply affordable housing in Asheville. We believe at Land of the Sky in a generative God who says yes. And the thing that often keeps us from that is fear and scarcity. And that's rooted, like we deeply embedded that in the Christian tradition, and particularly how we live that out. So if you think about choices you make or things you see, you might ask yourself, or a question of reflection is, like, what's my fear here? And how am I living out of scarcity? Because those things are pretty strong drivers of human behavior. And Christianity has done a really good job at actually reinforcing that. Though Jesus was not fearful for the most part, I imagine as a person who was fully human as well, that there was fear there in his life. And he didn't operate from places of scarcity. So when Beloved put out that little vision by which they imagined there might be a place where they could create a village for affordable housing, what we saw was that we had 4 acres of land in which that could sit. Part of the reason why we want to do this is because we want to be changed by the people who will live there. We want to see them and to be in relationship with them because we know that they will change us. There are a lot of people in our community around the church who aren't happy about the possibility that 12 new homes will exist for people who otherwise had been without homes. Guess what their primary concern is?
Property.
That is true. What is the primary way in which wealth is transferred in this country? Inheritance and property. Who could own property since the beginning of the United States' existence? White people, right? So these systems are real, and someone helps us understand how we might be responsive. When people say to me, I'm very concerned about our property values, I say, I hear that. I'm sorry. We're a church, and our concern is not property values. It's not, right? I mean, it really, that's hard, and it's real. So we yield our privilege so that others can have what they need. And that's not always easy, but it will mean things like we yield property or property values. It will mean we make reparations, which legitimately would look like a transfer of our wealth. It will mean a lot. Yielding privilege is really, really hard. First off, it's hard if you don't realize you have it. And second off, it's hard because it means you're going to have to give up some stuff. And we live in a world that teaches us this is a zero-sum game, that there's not enough. So if you give up some of what you have, then you won't have enough. Unless, of course, you already had more than enough. Then you're precisely the person who should share. That's the God economy. My hope is that as you continue to do the good work of exploring how to participate more deeply in the justice work of the world, is that you are able to see. You can't see if you don't know the history. You don't see the stories and sit with the people. My hope is that you take seriously the invitation to go outside, right, of the locations you find yourself, to be in relationship, to learn, and to grow with the humans who are all around us. I'm wondering if you have anything that you, like, after listening, that we would.
That's excellent. Can you say more about how we listen to people who maybe
without trying to fix or without.
Sure, absolutely. So this is an interesting story about the tiny houses that happened. I had a gentleman come who said there are people who are unhappy about this. Now, these aren't people in the actual community. If you know where we're situated, there's a little bit of homes right there, and then Governor's View separates us from Beverly Hills. And this person came to talk to me about all the people in Beverly Hills who were unhappy about it, and I thought, wow, they skipped over Governor's View to get to their being upset about this. I'm like, that's a lot of energy a mile away from the church. And he explained, well, the concern is that the people who are coming, that they would need, that there's no plan for them to have financial counseling, and there's no plan for them to, what's the story about their use of alcohol and drugs, and so they asking those questions, and I was like, whoa, hey friend, I was like, so it's really interesting that you start with the poor people need financial counseling and not poor people can't figure out how to do their money because they're robbing Peter to pay Paul because they don't have enough of it. I like that's an interesting vantage point that you don't know if you're not listening to the struggles of a person who's the working poor. In no world should anyone have to work 3 jobs. We live in a culture and currently in a system, right, in which we haven't raised the minimum wage in my lifetime. Like that's pretty crazy, right? Like it's been a long time since the minimum wage has been raised, which means it's not actually impactful, and it doesn't actually serve people in their ability to live well. So, listening looks like not assuming we know what they need, right? They need financial counseling. They need to go to a recovery meeting. They need to do this, right? Whatever we assume they need. Part of the mechanism by which the tiny house village will exist is through covenant and community, an organic relationship by which we sit down and say, what do you need? What are the challenges you face? How can we connect you to the things that you need to change your life? One of the central driving things about charity is it assumes that we know what impacted people need. Impacted people often know exactly what they need. And we often don't want to give it to them because it often asks us to do something different or to change. So if you sit with someone who's impacted in a variety of ways and ask them what they need, but if you go to the hospital and you ask a person who works in housekeeping, like, what do you need? I need a higher wage. I need enough money to send my kids to daycare because I'm here. I need enough money to get good food so that we're not eating food that's not healthy, which contributes to poor health. Like, I mean, the layers of complexity of the problem aren't all that complicated. I mean, they're pretty common sense how we get there. And part of how we fail is that we figure that we must know all the answers. So part of listening is really sitting down and asking people what they need and meeting them there. It may be that that's not exactly what they need and that they don't even know what they need in that moment. But part of the ability for them to become self-sustaining is to actually do that through learning too. And that learning is resource heavy, right? It means that people will fail. People will not get it right all the time. And our job is actually to abide in that moment, not to manage it and fix it. Which, when you're a privileged person who's got their stuff together, like, you're good at it. You manage and fix stuff, right? People are probably executives, managers, right? Those are the sort of roles we hold. And all the managing and the fixing of the world can't actually undo the systems that are so unjust right now.
Good. Can we take some questions? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
All right, let's take some questions. Who would like a question for Sarah?
I live in Beverly Hills and I hadn't even heard about this.
Great. Well, whatever they say, it's not true.
And he's a realtor, you should know.
Yeah. And I'm a realtor. But no, I'm actually more interested in learning more about it. So that's probably for a later time, but I'd like to just know about it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Mac, I'm in a clergy group with him, and there's a clergy, I think, build for Habitat for Humanity in November, and he invited all of us in this clergy group, and I said, hey, do you know about the Beloved Village? Because you should have Beloved come and talk about the Beloved Village at First Baptist, so you should. But it will be 12 micro homes. They're about 400 square foot, but they are large. I mean, it's kind of remarkable. And the first one has gone up this last week. It went up as part of a blitz build for a model home, basically. Warren Wilson College is part of, they brought their building crew, the person who's in charge, Doug Bradley, and he brought college students, and they built a house in a week. It's pretty remarkable. It's not finished, it's the external part of it. But you can come and, it will be finished, and then it will serve as the model that helps people see. They'll be lovely little homes, and they're going in an acre of the property that is abandoned forest. It has low impact grading, and the ability to do this has been made possible by partnerships all over. So the builder is a contractor from All Souls, and one of the other builders is a Methodist person, and I don't know what church she's from, but that's her roots. The grading came from a gentleman who's connected to Warren Wilson Presbyterian Church. People have made this possible by giving to make it happen. Part of the model of this that's pretty powerful is that folks who come live here will rent their space, but they will get an equity payment each month dropped into an account in the name of their home, right? So it's theirs, but like each home is basically collecting equity, because if you're a homeowner, right, and you have a crisis and you've gone through your savings, you use your home equity, right? And so what renters don't have is built into the system of renting and the ways in which the historical realities of keeping certain people out of property impact and have a sort of cumulative effect, is that people don't have any equity in their life. They don't have any equity anywhere to turn into solutions when they have a crisis. So over time, that will be accumulated for them, and then it'll sit in a trust for them, and folks will, if they want to go to school, or if they have a medical crisis, or they want to buy a car, or if they live there for years and then decide that they want to move, they'll be able to take the whole thing with them to put a down payment on something they want to do.
Do they have to get permission from y'all or use that for certain approved things?
So that'll be part of the covenant process that's created within that village. It won't be something that Land of the Sky will direct. Part of our commitment in this is yielding our land and our
Because that's still,
power over.
that's still controlling it.
Correct.
You can only use it for a few things.
Will they create like their own little HOA, so to speak, with self-governance?
Yes.
Oh, I love that. Okay. Good to hear.
Does rent sliding scale, or how we do that?
So rent is deeply affordable. And so what's interesting in the world of affordable housing is that affordable housing is affordable once you're at 80% AMI, which is like adjusted or average median or mean income. I don't, somebody else probably knows exactly what AMI means, but it's 80% of that. That's what's normal, right? In Asheville, 80% of AMI is like nobody can afford that. I mean, like you have to be a two-family or two-income family with professional jobs to get to the 40% AMI or the 80% AMI. This community will operate at is 40% or 30% AMI. I mean, it's like very low cost to create the circumstance by which folks who otherwise would not be able to be housed could be housed. It's interesting because somewhere on the Facebook page for Beloved, a woman posted something, and she said, check out these homes that are deeply affordable in South Asheville. And they're like micro home-ish, and they're like $250,000, and I'm like,
No.
and they're called like affordable Asheville, and I'm like,
No.
here's the problem, right? It's just, I mean, it's, yeah.
Another problem is when the federal poverty number was set, it was based assuming food would be your largest cost.
Mm.
This was in 1960, when I was born, 1963, I think. And the biggest cost for most people now is not food. Food's dirt cheap, relatively. It's housing, and in our country, medical. And if there were politicians that had certain body parts, it would need to be, and I'm talking female body parts because they're a lot tougher. It would be reset to reflect the reality that we have, because if you're spending a certain amount, assuming on food, that's not the problem anymore. It's housing, and that number where people reach the poverty level, if it was realistic, we would probably have 60 to 70 people considered in poverty. And maybe that would ring somebody's alarm bells to say, we have to change things. But I didn't know if y'all were aware of any push or organization or politician that was interested in resetting that so it would reflect reality. I mean, we're running out the ears of food. That's why farmers are going under. But it's not worth it to farm. But housing is a huge chunk.
I think that there have been iterative attempts to improve our housing situation that don't get at the real issue, right? And part of that is because we, in order to get at the real issue, which has to do, like, it is an outrageous amount of money that transfers by way of real estate. I mean, it's outrageous. Like, when I think about the payment that goes to a real estate agent on a $1 million property, like, that is oftentimes the entire income of a family, right? And that can happen multiple times a year for one transaction. For me, I'm interested, I'll throw this out there since there's real estate agents, but I would love to see real estate named that this is a part of the, this is an unfair part of the problem, right? As income went up, or as the cost of housing went up and the values rose, the then transfer of that is hugely significant to the players in that. Like, what would it mean for real estate to say, for every house that's sold, we put 1% or 2% back into something, right? Like, it's a way back to back out of the injustice of the system, and maybe that is a deeply affordable housing solution. It's really interesting because in our community, right, I feel like at the last city council meeting, one of the things that was said was, in order to do affordable housing, it's really difficult because we can't find private people who'll do it. Well, hello, the reason why you can't find private people to do it is because it's not turning a profit. You know who's really poised to do affordable housing? Churches, because we don't need a profit. We don't do it for a profit. We do it for the love of Jesus, right? Like, that's, right, so, and you know how many churches that, you guys are downtown, I don't expect you guys to build affordable housing here. But, all right, excellent.
Just wait a minute.
Great! Even better, because downtown's a perfect place to have them. One of the ideal things about our space is that we're actually like right off Tunnel Road, and so we're actually near an economic thoroughfare and near a bus line. That's pretty important. When Beloved put out their vision, they wanted $60,000 to buy land in Buncombe County, and I was like, we don't have $60,000, but we have some land here, and it looks like it's pretty close to the Tunnel Road, and we're zoned for it, which is awesome too. Not awesome for our neighbors who would like to stop it. But
how'd you get the tiny houses approved for zoning? I thought in Buncombe County,
they're stick built. Their
Their
houses
houses are stick built
Yeah.
and not just.
correct. You
And
can't have a
and they're
house
on
on wheels that don't move every 30
Yeah.
days.
They're on a foundation.
Yeah.
My question is sort of related to that. Is City Council and Buncombe County Commissioners, are they on board with this? What is your relationship with them?
So, Amy from Beloved does a lot of the legwork here, so I cannot take all of that credit. Like, I pastor a church and do it full time, and this is a this is a part of the work she's doing, so I can't take the credit for this. But yes, there are, the city is very much, the city very much supports the idea that someone's gonna have 12 more homes for people. I mean, there's within the zoning office and the permitting office, there is positive support for a solution that's closer to a solution than anything we really have, because it gets at fundamental issues that most affordable housing doesn't. And part of what we do when we create housing developments where there's affordable housing is if you create, and this is the problem for public housing, we emphasize quantity over the quality of what we've done. And so you might have 500 people in a high rise, right? And then you minimize relationship. And we have a culture that encourages individualism and doesn't actually feed that. So part of what this model is getting people in the community who can share relationship, because relationship is how the world changes and how people are held to be accountable to one another. And in the good work of church people, it's based in covenant, right? So those people who are living there will have a covenant with one another, and then they will create a covenant with the people at Land of the Sky and 15 Overbrook Place, which is the building and the location of our church. And then we'll go out to the neighborhood and we'll ask them what they would like in the covenant that we share with them. And if they say things like, there can't be any drug and alcohol use, and there can't be any, and everyone has to take financial counseling, we'll say, you first. So, not because I don't think, there's just an assumption there that is all tied up in a lot of assumption. So.
I was just gonna say, that's one of the characteristics of privilege. Privilege thinks it's got the answer and can fix you.
Exactly.
And we do not listen.
There's no alcoholic, white, drug-addicted people ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, none of us.
Point those naysayers to the community of Kenilworth. I grew up there, and they started building pockets of affordable housing in Kenilworth in the 60s.
Yeah.
60s?
Yeah.
And I can't afford a house in Kenilworth. I mean, housing values are absolutely over there. Right, Bob?
Oh, yeah.
There's the entire economy, I believe that the entire economy of Asheville is not sustainable. I think our nation's economy is not sustainable as it sits. There's a tipping point for labor and working people who, at some point, the squeeze is very real. The compression of wages and the inequity. Even if most of us don't. Although what we do is we adapt to it, right? So we became two-income families to manage that. And then we started working multiple jobs to manage that. And then we got technology so we could do more with less. And then we'd be busy. So, and then we just adapted to the injustice. And so that's the other thing we do, right? Is that we adapt. Sneaky like that.
So you mentioned a couple of things, 12 baskets. So
Yeah.
if you could give us, name maybe 3 things that we could out here go do.
Sure.
So these are 12 baskets.
Yeah, so you all could, I think going to lunch at 12 baskets would be good. And maybe what you all would do is you'd find a friend here and you'd say, let's go meet at 12 baskets. I think you would read the book White Fragility, because I think that's pretty important to the conversations that we're having right now. Because whether or not we see this as a white-black issue, much of privilege is harnessed by and kept by people absorbed in whiteness that they're not even aware was such a driver of their existence.
What's the subject? What's the black one?
Fragility. And I
I'll
think,
post that for us.
and there's a great video by Robin DiAngelo, but I hear also it's 6 hours on audiobook per one of my parishioners. And one of the telltale signs of whiteness is our time. He's like, I can get it done in 6 hours. I was like, great. And the third, let me think. I think you could send your kids to something that Asheville Youth Mission does. Because I think Asheville Youth Mission is very much trying to do work that challenges the colonialism, the lens of colonialism by which much of our understanding of charity comes. And so I think that's pretty powerful.
Those are all excellent.
And if you ever want to get a team together and come help build a tiny house in the village, Amy would be thrilled to have more people, and there will be plenty of time to do that. Yeah.
Everybody give Sarah a hand.